Polar the Titanic Bear. "That's my 10th bear today," said the voice of a young woman, proudly. Suddenly I felt myself being hurled through the air, then landing with a thump on a hard wooden bench. I opened my eyes and looked around the large, bright room littered with sawdust, tools, and scraps of felt. On either side of a long table sat women who were quickly sewing black glass eyes onto teddy bears. I soon learned that they earn their living by making bears and other stuffed animals for toy shops around the world. Christmas was approaching, and they had been given a large order. This special lot of bears, including me, was to be shipped from Germany to America. I wondered where America was and how I was to get there, but I didn't have long to wait. The next morning I was crammed into a box, my toes touching my ears. Weeks passed in darkness as I was jostled this way and that. First there was the rumbling of the baggage train, then the swaying of the ship, then the shouts of the dock hands. But I forgot about my aching limbs when a young woman lifted me out of my box and set me on a shelf with a dozen other bears. She dusted us all off, and then tied blue or pink ribbons around our necks. I'd arrived at F.A.O. Schwartz in New York, the largest toy shop in the world. I was amazed by the beautiful things I could see from my perch. From the ceiling hung every sort of flying machine: airships, aeroplanes, and hot air balloons. In a long case in front of me were little furnishings for dolls' houses, tiny bird cages, baby carriages, and bathtubs with china dolls in them. There was a wonderful railway worked by electricity, and I could see a bright red engine going around and around past flashing signal towers and stations. Because it was Christmas time, the shop was busy every day. My bear companions disappeared one by one, and I couldn't help wondering when my turn would come. One day, a lady with red cheeks looked me all over carefully, straightened my blue bow, and she said she would take me along with her. I was sad to leave my lovely surroundings and hated being packed into a horrid little box again by one of the sales clerks. For several days I was left in a closet. I thought everyone had forgotten me, but finally one morning the lady took me out of the box. Then we went down to the docks, where we boarded a large ship called the Coronia. The decks of the ship were crowded with people saying goodbye. As I looked about wondering what was to become of me, a little boy came running up. Flinging his arms around the lady with the red cheeks, he cried, "Oh, Aunt Nanny, I wish you were coming with us." She gave him a big hug, and then presented me to him. The little boy, my new master, had his father and mother with him, and Nurse Burns, whom he called Muddy Boons. Several people came down to see Master's family off, and I was admired by each one in turn, which made me feel very proud. "How high he holds his head," Master's father said. "What will you call him?" "Polar," Master replied promptly. A week later, we sighted the island of Madeira, near Portugal, which was to be our home for the next few months. It was a beautiful, bright afternoon when we went ashore. We traveled through the busy streets to our hotel in a rickety old wooden cart pulled by a bull. Our hotel was very grand. Master, Muddy Boons, and I had a big sunny room overlooking the garden and the blue sea beyond. I spent many lazy days out under the palms watching Master build little houses with sticks and stones and surround them with miniature gardens. And we rode in the bullock carts whenever we went up into the hills, exploring different parts of the island. One sad day, Master woke up with red spots all over his face. "He's got measles," the doctor said gravely. "You'll have to put him in quarantine." Everyone looked very worried. Master, Muddy Boons, and I were moved to a little cottage a short distance from the hotel. Master's mother explained that being in quarantine meant staying away from the other guests so that we wouldn't give them measles. We weren't in our new home for 5 minutes before a big brown mouse scampered across the floor. Poor Muddy Boone shrieked and went after it with a broom. She soon named our cottage Mouse Castle because it was full of mice, rats, and ants, and she spent all her spare minutes trying to kill them. I didn't like my new quarters a bit, for Master was too sick to even notice me, and I was put in a corner and forgotten. The doctor visited us often, and every day Master's parents came with fresh eggs and milk. Night after night I watched as Muddy Boone sat awake, holding Master's hot, limp hand in hers. A full week passed, and I began to wonder if he would ever be well enough to play with me again. But one morning I heard Master ask for me in a faint little voice. Muddy Boone's handed me to him, and he put me on his pillow, and there I lay without sitting the whole day. Slowly, Master began to grow stronger. He would sit up in bed, wash my face and paws, tie my ribbon, and give me my breakfast. I was so happy to see him better that he almost didn't care what he did to me. But I didn't relish the bath Muddy Boone's gave me one morning in a horrid, smelly liquid called disinfectant. She gave Master one too. Then 2 men came to the garden with a hammock. They carefully lifted Master in as he held tight to his little American flag in one hand and me in the other. Muddy Boone's led the way, and we all marched back to our own sunny room in the hotel. Early in April, we sailed back to America on a ship called the Adriatic. After we arrived in New York, we went to Master's new home in Tuxedo Park, which was surrounded by trees and overlooked a little lake. When the weather turned hot and sticky, we went to the family's summer house near Bar Harbor, Maine. I enjoyed splashing in the ocean with Master, or sitting on the rocks while he built forts and castles. Once he forgot about me, and the tide came in and almost carried me out to sea. But luckily Master rescued me just in time. When winter came, we returned to Tuxedo Park. Master and I tumbled about in the snow and made snowmen. Best of all, he gave me rides on his sled, running as fast as he could across the ice-covered lake, while the cold wind whistled in my ears. At Christmas, I had my own tree and new toys to play with. I enjoyed a delicious turkey dinner served on a small table that Master made for me. In the new year, we sailed away to some hot, sunny places. We went to Panama, where a great canal was being built right through the country so that ships could sail from one side to the other. One of the engineers invited Master, Muddy Boone's, and me to ride out to see it in his big private car. Bright flocks of parrots flew from the trees as we roared down the jungle roads. Bermuda was our last stop. Master took me to a beautiful beach where we spent many a long afternoon. He would make a sort of throne out of sand for me to sit on and say, "Now, Polar, don't you run away, but just stay quiet while I work." So I sat there watching him play and sniffing the salt air. The next winter we once more set sail on the Caronia, this time for Algiers in northern Africa. The weather was sunny, so we spent our days on deck romping about with the other children. The captain and Master were great friends, and we were often invited to his room for a cup of tea, as Master called his hot water and sugar. In Algiers, we saw Arabs dressed in long flowing robes. We stayed in a big hotel with a garden where I would sit on a bench with Muddy Boone's while Master played ball. In February, we celebrated George Washington's birthday. Master invited a few friends. We decorated the table with American flags, and Master dressed in red, white, and blue. After our tea party, we all fished presents from a big bag. From Algiers, we set sail for the south of the coast of France. From Algiers, we set sail for the south coast of France. At Monte Carlo, we rode to our hotel on the hill in a funny narrow railway. Master told me it was a funicular railway, and that it was pulled along by a cable. Then we went to Cannes, where we stayed for nearly a month. I sat in the hotel garden every morning while Master had an hour's spelling lesson with Muddy Boone's. One day we heard a loud buzzing noise. "An aeroplane!" Master shouted, throwing down his books. "Goodness me!" Muddy Boons cried, jumping to her feet. We all craned our necks up to the sky and watched as the airplane circled overhead. I could see the pilot sitting in the cockpit with his goggles on, and he waved at us before heading out over the sea. We took the night train to Paris. Strolling in the Tuileries gardens, we saw boys sailing their boats in the fountains, and watched hot air balloons rising toward the sky. Master took me part way up the Eiffel Tower one day and told me it was 984 feet high. He was always telling me the height and length of things. I was sorry when it was time to go back to America, for I loved Paris. But Master was excited because we were to set sail to New York on the Titanic, a magnificent new ship. Everyone said she was the biggest ship in the world. We were going to be on her very first voyage. The Titanic had left England a day before, and her first stop was Cherbourg, France. We took a train to Cherbourg, and that evening we went out to the huge ship on a little tugboat. As we stepped on board, the ship's doctor, who had known all of us on the Adriatic, kissed Master and said, "I see you still have Polar with you, little man." We had fairly smooth weather those first few days and spent most of our time on deck, where Master would spin his whip top or play ball. But we also loved exploring the great ship. There was a giant staircase with a big glass dome over it. Master sent me flying down the banister one morning. In the ship's gymnasium we saw bicycles and rowing machines and even a mechanical camel for the passengers to ride on. There was a lovely sun parlor on the upper deck where we spent our afternoons, and Master allowed a little girlfriend of his to play with me. We ate in the first-class dining saloon. The tables there were covered with stiffly starched white tablecloths and polished silver, and the ship's band played for us every night, and our stateroom was even bigger than Master's bedroom at home. One day, Master's mother and Muddy Boons went down to the lower decks and had a Turkish bath. They didn't like this hot steam bath one bit, although they did enjoy a cooling dip in the ship's swimming pool afterwards. It was our 5th night at sea. I had been in bed a few hours when I suddenly opened my eyes. The lights had been turned on. Muddy Boons was dressing Master in a great hurry. "Come, we're taking a trip to see the stars," she said. Master's parents were already dressed. They were gathering a few belongings together. I was surprised when I saw Master's mother reach for life belts. Then, seizing me from my little net rack beside Master's bed, she tucked me under his arm. We soon joined a group of people standing in the main hall. Everyone was very quiet, talking in hushed voices. Someone had whispered that we had struck an iceberg and that water was pouring into the ship. A young man in a uniform helped fasten on Master's life belt. Patting him on the head, he said, "Goodbye, little man." Then Master's father told us to follow him to the top deck, where we would climb into one of the lifeboats. Swinging out from the ship's side, and we were climbing aboard. Our little party kept rowing until we were about 40 of us in line. When the officer said, "Lower away," and we were in the water with awful jerks. Master clasped me in his arms. His eyes were shut tight and his face was white. We finally reached the water safely and rowed off toward a faint light on the horizon. It was very dark. Aside from the stars and the brilliantly lighted ship that towered above us, we could see nothing. Soon after we left the Titanic, the captain sent up rockets as a distress signal. We all watched the ship steadily, except Master, who was asleep. 2 hours later, we saw the last light go out and heard the dreadful cries that told us all was over. The great Titanic had gone down. It seemed like a horrible dream. The breathtaking silence and feeling of utter loneliness cast a deep gloom over our little boatload. Toward 3 o'clock in the morning, an icy breeze sprang up, and the sea grew rough. Master opened his eyes and said he felt seasick, but Muddy Boons, who had him on her lap, soon quieted him with a story of Cinderella. About an hour later, someone suddenly shouted, "Here comes a ship!" Looking toward the horizon, we first saw a white light and then some rockets. As the ship gradually approached, we feared she might either run us down or not see us at all, since we had no lantern. But soon she slowed down and then stopped. As the faint mist cleared just before the dawn, the new moon was setting, and a star was faintly twinkling on the pink horizon. The first rays of sun cast a wonderful glow on the icebergs that rose from the ocean all around us. Master suddenly opened his eyes and, looking about him, exclaimed, "Oh, Muddy, look at the beautiful North Pole with no Santa Claus on it." A woman who had been crying smiled at him through her tears. Our rescue ship, the Carpathia, looked very small amidst the few bits of wreckage where the huge Titanic had gone down. We finally drew alongside, and the men climbed aboard the Carpathia on rope ladders. The women were hauled up in a sort of swing, and the children in canvas bags. Soon everyone had been rescued. Except for me. I lay alone in the empty lifeboat. Several minutes went by, but nothing happened. Everyone seemed to have forgotten me. My heart began to pound. I imagined being left there, tossed by the waves forever. Would I ever see Master again? Suddenly I felt a terrible jerk, and then another. The boat swayed dangerously. I nearly fell into the icy water as several sailors pulled the lifeboat up the decks of the Carpathia. I slid down the ribs of the boat, banging my back against each one along the way, and landed in a puddle. "That's the last of them, then," said a sailor. He turned the boat over with a bang, and I fell onto the hard deck in a wet, miserable heap. I lay there for what must have been hours. Then I heard a kind voice. "Hello there, fancy seeing you again." It was one of the sailors from the Titanic. He had picked me up and squeezed the water out of me, quite taking my breath away. Then he carried me down some stairs and into a warm room. It was full of passengers with blankets around them. Many of them held hot drinks. "Polar!" a familiar voice shouted from across the room. It was Master. He rushed over and took me in his arms. I was delighted to see him again, too, but I was also rather upset to see that he was holding an ugly brown bear. His mother had bought it for him in the ship's barber shop, thinking that I had fallen overboard. As soon as Master saw me, however, he hugged and kissed me. He took me to bed with him that night and every night after, forgetting all about the other bear. During the next 4 long days, Master and I spent as much time as we could on deck, even though it was rainy or foggy every day. But the ship was so crowded with more than 700 Titanic survivors, as well as the Carpathia's passengers, that there was hardly room to move. Master's mother and Muddy Boone spent hours cutting up blankets to make clothes for people who had none. At last, we slowly steamed up New York Harbor in the middle of a thunderstorm. We were escorted by several boats full of people taking flash pictures of us. "Look at the big parade, Muddy Boones, with no brass band," Master cried as we saw the huge crowds of people in cars lining the docks. We were glad to escape the hubbub with members of the family who had come down to meet us. I was happy to settle down to quiet country life in Tuxedo Park. The experience we had gone through seemed to bring Master and me closer together than ever before. He made a great pet of me, and supplied me with 2 new suits of clothes and a little white wooden bed. I often thought back to how I was almost lost on the wide ocean, but I felt much better when Master tucked me beside him in bed each night, and whispered softly in my ear, "Good night, Polar." Master goes to school now, and I'm left alone much of the time, but I always look forward to the warm greeting he gives me in return. He has been a good master, and I hope he will be blessed with a long and happy life, though I realize that I shall see less and less of him as the years go by. I shall always feel, no matter what happens, that I occupy a large corner of his true and tender heart, and that he will be loyal to me till the end.